Morning and hello everyone. I'm Leora Bauer from the Taub Center and I'm a researcher in the Initiative on Development and Inequality in Early Childhood, and I will be the moderator today. We're extremely happy to host you for the first conference of the Taub Center on Early Childhood that will deal with the various frameworks from routine and COVID-19 and back. This conference is held with the very generous support of the Beracha Foundation, the Van Leer Foundation, and Yad Hanadiv. The conference will be held in Hebrew, and you're invited to watch it on the Facebook page of the Taub Center and receive the simultaneous interpreting. We also have participants on the Zoom platform, and there too you can choose the language and listen to the conference either in Hebrew or in its interpreting into English. I'd like to ask all the participants to put their cellular phones on silent mode, and please wear your masks throughout the conference. We observe the instructions of the Ministry of Health. For the English participants,
my name is Leora Bowers, and I'm the Chief Financial and Operating Officer at the Taub Center, and I will be moderating the conference throughout the day. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Taub Center's first Early Childhood Conference, this year on the topic of Early Childhood Education in Israel, to Corona and back. This conference is generously supported by the Beracha Foundation, the Bernard van Leer Foundation, and Yad Hanadiv. The conference will be taking place in Hebrew, and for those of you watching on the live stream via Zoom, please note that there are two channels. One channel broadcasting live in Hebrew and one channel in English in simultaneous translation. We're also broadcasting the conference on the Taub Center's Facebook pages in Hebrew and in English. Before we begin, please be sure to silence your phones and to keep your mask on during the conference. In the interest of time and getting straight to the issues, we will keep our introductions of speakers very brief throughout the day, but you can access the complete bios of each speaker on the conference page of the Taub Center website.
I'm happy to announce that this week, in particular, just before the conference, we launch a new chapter that deals with the conference. This chapter or this episode included Dr. Nomi Moreno, former head of early childhood in WITSO, and today is heading the Dialogue for Early Childhood, and Dr. Carmel Blanc, a researcher in the Taub Center on Development and Inequality in Early Childhood and a member of the faculty in the Rupin Academic Center. In this episode, they talk about characteristics of education in early childhood, different frameworks for children, and important conclusions that they've reached after the COVID crisis. The episode is part and parcel of a whole series that deals with Israel in 2040, and it's available already now on every platform that you are using. And now I'll introduce the speakers of the opening session. During the day, we will briefly introduce the speakers, but you can read their bios on the conference webpage of the Taub Center. First, we will hear Professor Aviv Weiss, President of the Taub Center and Professor of Economics at the Ilan University. In addition to this, he's the editor of the Quarterly on Economics, a co-editor of Economic Inquiry, member of the Competition Forum, and the academic representative of the Committee for the Supervision of Prices and a co-fellow in IVA. After Avi, we will hear Daniella Ben Atar, representative of Bernard van Leer Foundation, who operates for the development and implementation of strategy for children in early childhood, together with police, civil society, the business sector, and the academia. In her current position, she's implementing her vast experience in a meeting point between children and parents in order to implement Urban 95 of the Van Leer Foundation and contribute to the strategic development of the program on the international plane. After Daniella, we will hear Professor Yossi Shavit, chairperson of the Taub Initiative on Development and Inequality in Early Childhood. Yossi is a professor emeritus of sociology at the Tel Aviv University and is head of the Weinberg Chair for the research of inequality. He's researching social inequality with an emphasis on education and educational policy and the research of ethnic relations in Israel. Avi, you're invited to the stage now. Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome. It is very exciting and very delightful that we're holding this conference. Given the situation that we're experiencing in this economy, we're making this a hybrid conference, but in any case, it is held and it's broadcast live, and you can see everyone, and everyone is wearing their masks, of course. It makes me very happy, this entire project, because I learned so many things from it. It made me think about so many things throughout the years concerning the importance of early childhood. And I have to say that I was less aware of it before we really started, or before Yossi launched this project. And then this brings me to the topic, and I say, okay, so there are amazing, striking findings of the, the staff or Heckman that you all know his work. You see the importance of the investment in early childhood, to what extent one can benefit the entire society and obviously the individual by the very investment in these ages. And of course, it makes redundant, or actually we no longer relate to the frameworks as being babysitters, but brings it to the place that it should really be in, namely that benefit and that privilege that we have to invest in early childhood. And then the economist in me rises to the surface, and I have to admit that I am an economist, and when this comes out, it says, okay, fine. On the one hand, we can really study and see its importance, but on the other hand, what does it mean? What are the implications to society? Should society invest in this? Or perhaps we should say, like economists like to say normally, that, okay, if that's really worth so much, then the family should invest in it, and the children themselves, their parents would invest in it, and this is why we shouldn't do anything more than that. It's important to understand it, but the question of what to do about it is a separate issue. And then that economist who studied in Chicago, and you know what that means, would look again and say, okay, so in order to truly think about this topic, we should see if there's something, some market failure. Is there something else happening? Maybe we need intervention. And then I look and I say, yes, definitely. Definitely, there are market failures. There are market failures which are simple and very clear, and others that are not that clear. There are market failures in the sense that the ability of certain families in certain conditions to receive loans to do what is necessary in order to offer that education to children. Do we have the ability to reach the optimal solution on or results on our own, or perhaps there's something in the capital market that undermines the ability to reach that place? And ostensibly, there are such market failures, which are not simple to poor and less well-to-do families, and they cannot reach those places that they'd like to be in, but they cannot. And this obviously can be a psychological inability, and that too is one of the things that we'll be hearing about today. Various, deficiencies that lead us to this place. In addition to this, I look at where the benefit for the entire society comes from. And the benefit obviously comes not only from the, or to the individual himself or herself, but you have exogenous positive influences that come from this education, because it does things like it reduces the level of crime in the market. It increases tolerance in society. It brings in a lot of taxes to the country, which is not really taken into account in the particular calculation of a specific family. So when you come and you ask, should we invest or should we not invest? Definitely there is a certain market failure here that we should attempt to remove by having an external intervention. And hence I see the importance of this project. The project is important not only to tell us what is happening to the scores of children or what happens to them when they reach an older age, and not only what is happening to the entire economy concerning the type of employment we're going to have, but rather we should ask the questions of policy. We should ask, what does it mean for what society needs to actually look at? And I'm here to learn together with you, and I'm extremely happy that I will have the opportunity to do that. I'd like to say once again, thank you to the Beracha Foundation, to the Bernard van Leer and Leer van Leer Foundation, without whom this entire project would not have taken place. And I'd like to also say thank you to Professor Yossi Shavit, from whom I already learned so much, and I'm sure that I will learn a lot more, and his entire team. And also those who are working full-time and those who are only part-time working on this project. And I'd like to thank Anat and Racheli and Chedva for their encouragement and hard work in organizing this conference. I'd like to wish you all a very fruitful conference. Hello. Thank you very much, Avi. Good morning. It already feels like, afternoon, but it's morning. I'm so moved to be here today. We've gone a long way to reach this point, and I'd like to tell you a bit about this way. But first of all, I'd like to truly thank Avi, Yossi Shavit, who is the champion of this entire project, and Sivian, everyone from the Taub Center, and also my partners, Tali Erin from the Beracha Foundation, and Efrat Dgani Tapara from Yad Hanadiv, with whom we are working to support this project. So I'd just like to tell you how I got here. I started my position in the Bernard van Leer Foundation that supports early childhood and has been doing that for 60 years. It's an international Dutch foundation, and I started in 2015 as the first Israeli representative. All of a sudden, they wanted someone in Israel to introduce a major change when it comes to policy and influence, etc. So I came equipped with a lot of international knowledge that you can have, like you say, Hekma and studies. There's a lot of well-established knowledge, but I had, I had to receive the local data, how to invest money, and I couldn't find any data. I only found data on older children. But if we know that the development of the brain and the establishment of its development happens even prior to pregnancy or in pregnancy before birth, and then in the first 3 years, it's so hard to find data in Israel. You do find data around the world. So I said, okay, we need to do it. I know the Taub Center, very serious center. I truly like what they do because they connect, theory to political alternatives. And I said, okay, there's a lacuna here. There's a black hole that we have to do something about it. And they said, you know what, you're right. But what can we do about this age? Who will we talk to? We have the Ministry of Education, and they work with 6 years old and above. But who takes care of the early childhood? There is a bit of, social affairs and stuff, but not more than that. So I go back and I try to see what I can do. We went to my foundation and I said, okay, first of all, this topic, I said, first of all, there's a lack of data, and I live in a country that has one of the largest social gaps in the OECD countries. So the discourse of early childhood always has to do with the cost of living, employment. I couldn't find anything, that I saw happening around the world concerning how early childhood is also an engine to reduce gaps. Here and there you have a statement, but they mostly talk about parents and cost of living. It's all legitimate. I'm not saying it isn't, but if you want to reduce gaps, if you understand that there's a major issue here, why don't we invest in this critical age where everything starts? And I'm talking, all those, why wait for the gaps to happen when they reach school? There's nothing of this discourse. And I asked the people in the foundation, and they said, come and learn. And I studied two cases that were very, very inspiring to me. One was in Peru, in South America. If you don't know, they truly are leaders in early childhood. They do amazing things. No wonder Trachtenberg comes from there. In 2011, the new president of Peru, he wanted to treat the inequality, and obviously in South America, it's crazy numbers. It's something totally different to the OECD. 42% of the children, the poverty percentage is huge. And he wanted to tackle, this new president wanted to tackle poverty. And how does he do this? He sets up a social inclusion ministry, and he chooses 5 programs. One is early childhood or infantry, that's kunamas. And how do they formulate that? To reduce cognitive, motoric gaps, social economic gaps, in order to treat the subject of poverty. And the kunamas is a national program, and that refers to various early childhood frameworks, and it depends on, it's both in the city and in the villages. And he, as the president, places it as a flagship in order to treat poverty, early childhood. The second one is Brazil. And here we have someone who is called Usma Tara. He's a doctor, a physician who was in charge of health in the area of Rio and then became minister, again in the Ministry of Social Development. And he also reviews the subject. He obviously looks at the major poverty, and he said, we did so many things to tackle poverty, but there's a missing link, and that's early childhood. I know it. I'm a physician. I know exactly what's happening to the brain. We have to come up with a program that tackles this age. This is what we need in order to tackle poverty. So he sets the first home visit program, 1.3 million families to this date. They linked it with the cash transfer programs to families. This is how you get to the weakest families and treat poverty. So that today shows many results and many complications as well, but that's what he does there. So I'm saying, okay, there are leaders in the world that decide that the way to treat poverty is early childhood. It's not happening here. A year or two later, I get another phone call from the Taub Center, and they say, come. You mentioned something important. There's someone who wants to talk to you about this, Professor Yossi Shavit. He's an amazing man who conducted great studies, and he tells me that throughout his career, he dealt with inequality in the educational system, and he was exposed to the brain science, the understanding that it starts at an early age. You cannot discuss inequality unless you talk about the earliest ages. And what amazes me in this discourse, and I too was no expert on early childhood before that, people who are so, well-schooled and educated, how can you even start to work if only now they understand the importance of it? There's something that they understand, but as Avi justly said, how do you translate this to deeds? And Yossi said, that's exactly what I want. I want to conduct a study. We need something very local. We have unique characteristics in the state of Israel. We have the highest productivity rate, the highest inequality rate, the percentage of women who are working, participation in the educational frameworks. So there are specific characteristics. I said, wonderful. And we started there. And this is how it rolled to this amazing initiative of reducing gaps in early childhood. And together with my partners from the Beracha Foundation and Yad Hanadiv, we supported this initiative. And there's another interesting thing. The Taub Center, as an Israeli serious agency, decides to add a topic to their agenda, to their organization, which is early childhood, and that's interdisciplinary. You have psychology involved and sociology, and it's not always simple. So I'm so moved even by this thing alone. So I think that that's a super important initiative without which we can make no progress. It's not enough, the issue of research. You have to make knowledge available. And this is why we're here. There are so many people on Zoom and everyone's listening. And it's not just to produce data and studies and evidence, but how to actually disseminate it, how to place it in the hands of the decision makers, how to change the priorities and the resources in the country. And that is what we're doing here in the Taub Center. It's so important. And it's a part of that effort. So I do hope that we will leave this conference with not only the understanding of the importance of early childhood and all that that entails, but that early childhood is a tool with which to combat poverty and help in the reduction of gaps. So thank you very much and a fruitful conference. It's a great pleasure to be up here because you can take the mask off. By the time Racheli gets organized here, while we're talking on a very, very personal note, I'd like to add something which I forgot to prepare in advance, but I remember now that we need to thank Ehud Braver. Habi, do you still remember? Ehud Braver was the VP of the Premier's office, and one day the staff of the Taub Center was invited to a forum to produce a survey, and I gave the review of inequality, and I was absorbed by this discourse that Daniella was mentioned. At that time, I started thinking about Hackman and all that, and to say that it all starts in early childhood, and I was swept away by it. And he said, put your money where your mouth is, and now you're putting your money where my mouth was. He truly encouraged us, and you have to actually give him the credit to that. So I'm here to congratulate, but I cannot but present you with data because that's what I do in my life. And as Daniella said, this is the formative graph of our initiative. When we read this study written by Feinstein from nearly 20 years ago, and we read it rather late, we only then understood that it was so important to start with early childhood. This graph was done in England, but it's true for other countries. It teaches us that already at the age of 22 months, very early on, various cognitive gaps are discovered between children from different socioeconomic classes. And these gaps that are discovered earlier on tend to widen like a fan during one's life. In other words, a very significant part of inequality that is discovered later on in life, in matriculation exams, in the jams, in different test results, some of it can be traced back and detected earlier on, and probably, and most probably even reduced. And this is the agenda of our initiative. We are studying the factors and causes that influence, that shape the evolution of inequality among different ethnic groups and social economic groups and children in early childhood. Now, Israel, as Daniella already started to say, is extremely unique. We are constantly leaning on global literature, mostly American and a bit from Europe, but Israel is so different to these countries in so many ways. First of all, our demographics is totally different. Everyone knows that when I say a number, you're telling me exactly what that number is. What is 3.1? It's the number of children that the average woman has. Every person who sits in this hall most probably knows it. And 9.8 is the percentage of children in early childhood in Israel out of the entire population. That's a very high rate. And perhaps the most important thing is this bigger slide, or the bigger graph of these three that you can see here, is representing the structure or the breakdown of ages in Israel. Every such slice represents the number of children, of females and male from the right and the left, in a certain age group, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, etc. In every generation, from one generation to another, these slices grow bigger and bigger. And if we build a certain amount, a certain number of daycare centers to address the needs of a particular generation, within 4 or 5 years, that's not going to be enough. And you have to immediately build more. And who has the money to invest in quality beyond, the bricks and the mortar and the hardware? In other words, our demographics makes it very difficult for us to improve the qualities of the environment in which children grow up and develop. It is something very singular to Israel. I show in this slide the US and the EU, but I could show no matter what country you'd like to look at. Even in Syria, the situation is not that dire. And not only that, in Israel, children live in poverty, 25% approximately of the children. And I'm not talking about early childhood. I'm talking about all the category from age 0 to 17. They live in poverty. These are those blocks, the yellow blocks. So we have so many children, out of whom many live in poverty. And then we're asking, what does the state do about this? So here's the public expenditure per child for education and treatment from 0 to 5. Israel is, shown by this arrow. You see how low we are? It's not because our country does not invest a lot of money in those ages, but there are just many kids. So per child, the investment is extremely low. And this is also expressed in the number of children per staff members. There's the Tally study, you probably know it, that compared Israel to a number of other countries. And we see that in Israel, the ratio between the number of children and the number of staff members in preschools, ages 3 and above, is the worst. We would like the number to be low, not high, that there would be fewer children per adult. And here it's high, whether this is the Hebrew-speaking or the Arabic-speaking sector in Israel. And as part of this stinginess, if I can use this phrase, of the state, we can see that the level of education of the educational staffs is extremely low in those frameworks where our dear children are spending the best of their years. The number of employees with a very low level of education is extremely high. It is higher in the Hebrew-speaking society than in the Arabic-speaking society. Maybe because Arab women don't have alternatives, and this is why they work in educational frameworks despite their high education. But still, we see insufficient training in those frameworks in Israel. And why? Because most of the staff is made up of assistants. And why? Because they're cheap. Why do we need to employ them? Because we don't have enough budget. Why don't we have enough budget? Because we have too many kids. So all that I said is true mostly for ages 3 to 6. when it comes to 0 to 3, this is very prominent because we have very little data. We do have that most kids in those ages participate in non-supervised frameworks, and this is why it's important to subordinate these frameworks to supervision, to inspection, hence the importance, the great importance of the supervision law that is now being implemented. It's a real revolution. And this is why one of the sessions in this conference would be devoted to this topic. The supervision law defines educational requirements of the staff members, the number of children, safety elements, curricular elements, etc. So the initiative, our initiative that was discussed so far, deals with mostly 3 things. One is research. Second is policy, in the sense that it sees it as its duty to propose policy alternatives in the different realms that it preoccupies itself with, and also education. We're trying to disseminate that, to spread the word, to spread the gospel, as they say. We talk to whoever wishes to listen to us. We give seminars. We gave a seminar in which mostly women, very active women in this field, participate, which is an infrastructural seminar, and we'll have one next year. And we give presentations and lectures wherever we're invited to. Sometimes we just push ourselves forcefully in the different government agencies and NGOs in different educational frameworks, and we're trying to convince people of the importance of this topic. We create databases, we give reviews of literature, we provide original studies, we write position papers, we teach seminars, and we give lectures and presentations, screenings. The foundations were mentioned a number of times, and I'd like to say one thing, which is very genuine. Daniella, when you came to my office at the university the first time, and I was in that position of the professor, I understood very, very quickly that I had a lot to learn. We had a conversation that truly I found so fruitful. The 3 foundations with which we work are so well conversant in these topics, and I learned so much from you. And I'm not saying this, it's not lip service. So thank you very much for this great contribution that you're making. We have a wonderful staff. You've met Liora. Yael Navon is also here. Here's Yael and Carmel Blanc sitting right next to her. Most probably Noam Zontag is here. And regretfully, Dana could not be here because of a family issue. So this is our initiative. The conference would be made up of 3 sessions. The first one is a purely research session. And in this session, we'll talk about the efficiency and availability of early childhood frameworks in Israel. Naomi Moreno is going to be the moderator, and Zontag will participate. He'll talk about the study. Shavit Madala, who will present another study about the availability of the accessibility of a certain program. Elad Demalach will present an amazing paper on a sort of a quasi-experimental concerning the participation in early childhood frameworks in different localities. Were exposed to this paper only 2 weeks ago, and I was so moved that I asked him to come and join our conference. And Tali Yariv Mashal will be the closing this session. The second session is going to be extremely important, and that will deal with the supervision law. I'm going to be the moderator, and Professor Yusuf Jabarin, is he here? He's on his way. former member of Knesset who was the chair of the committee. Achinoam is over here now. Okay, Sima Haddad. Hi, Sima. Deputy Chair of the Early Childhood Council, perhaps the most important organization in Israel that initiates and coordinates, and Varda Malka from the Ministry of Employment. Is Varda here? There in the shadow. And then I think we'll have a break, if I'm not mistaken. After the first break, after the first session, we'll have a break. And the last session, you cannot do without COVID, definitely in view of the intimidations we've seen yesterday. It's back on the scene, and we cannot but discuss that too. I had the honor of being one of many who were members in the committee headed by Professor Yossi, who's here. It's a committee that was initiated by the chief scientist of the Ministry of Education that had to formulate directions of exiting COVID and various corrections that needed to be done following the damages inflicted by COVID. We did a wonderful job, and we wanted Yair to come and tell us about the work that was done. Meirav from... How is it called in the Ministry of Education, Meirav? The Department of Early Childhood in the Ministry of Education, and Dr. Carmel Blanc, who was already introduced. They will respond. They will be the respondents and respond to Yair's presentation. So that's what's on the agenda. I thank all those who are here, all those who are listening from afar, and we can start with the first session.